Terminator Dark Fate is in theaters now, and this is a spoiler review for Terminator Dark Fate, so if you have not seen Terminator Dark Fate, I do have a spoiler-free review. I will leave that link in the description below. This is going to be me talking about some things that I vaguely referenced in my spoiler-free review that I was trying to be super vague about, even though it was really hard to beat around the bush on some of that stuff. This is going to be more in-depth about some of that stuff. A lot of that stuff is going to be the focal point of this video. And probably 2 or 3 topics. I'm leaning more towards 2. There's definitely 2 things I definitely want to talk about. I felt like I couldn't do that in a review that wasn't spoiler-free. So this is my spoiler review for Terminator Dark Fate. If you have not seen the movie and you're still here, you have been warned. If you don't want any spoilers, and I'm going to get right into it. So one of the things I mentioned in my review that I thought was actually a wise decision, that it just didn't have a lot of payoff, was within the first minute of the movie, John Connor gets ganked. I know there's going to be a huge outrage about that. I know that some other fellow YouTubers have kind of made their feelings known about that. I was perfectly okay with that. I was fine with it, because the movie was saying that John Connor is no longer the leader of the Resistance, and that this is actually the 3rd Terminator movie, even though it's the 6th one released. Chronologically, the other 3, Rise of the Machines, Salvation, Genesis, take place in an alternate timeline. My only problem with them killing John Connor in this movie is 2 things. One, and this is something I mentioned in my spoiler-free review, that I really beat around the bush on, is 1, we already had 5 movies establishing that John Connor was the leader of the Resistance. I'm not going to necessarily say that it's a slap in the face to the character of John Connor, because I understand what this movie is. It's technically the 3rd Terminator movie. It ignores the events of the last 3, and is a direct sequel to Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I'm fine with that. That's why I don't feel that this is a huge slap in the face to John Connor as a character. I've seen people say that what happens with John Connor when he gets killed by Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator, that Skynet sends back, is that it's basically what happens with Newt and the rest of the crew in Alien 3. I don't see it that way. My issue with that, as I've said, my issue with this whole John Connor getting killed thing is, as I've said already, 1, we've had 5 movies to establish who he is. It's just, why revert to that in the 6th movie? I understand it's a direct sequel to Terminator 2. The other 3 are in an alternate timeline. But this is the 6th Terminator movie released. This is not the 3rd Terminator movie released. If this was the actual 3rd Terminator movie that had been released, like if it was Terminator 2, and then after Terminator 2 we got this one instead of Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, I think it would have made more sense. But because we already have all of that lore and mythology established in the Terminator franchise, that these 5 movies have been telling us that John Connor is the Resistance leader, that payoff that he's not, and it's actually the character of Danny, just doesn't feel earned. And it just doesn't feel earned as well, because Danny is such a hollow character. I have no problem with her being the Resistance leader, but it's just I didn't have enough emotional attachment to her. I wanted her to be more in the forefront, where she felt like she was more of a background prop in this. She didn't really have all that much to do until the 3rd act, where she starts kicking ass. And I think it actually would have made more sense to have Grace, the character played by Mackenzie Davis, be the one who is the leader of the Resistance in the future. There was at least depth there, and I feel like that's what they were hinting at. But at the last minute, they wanted to do a huge bait and switch, and just to fool the audience. That's kind of what it felt like. So those are really my 2 issues with the whole John Connor gets killed in this. Again, I don't think it's a slap in the face to the character. Because if it was a slap in the face to the character, and this was actually the 3rd Terminator movie, maybe it would be a slap to the face of the character if this was the actual 3rd Terminator movie, which chronologically, within a timeline, it is. But again, this is the 6th Terminator movie released. So, I mean, even if those other 3, Rise of the Machines, Salvation, and Genesis, take place in an alternate timeline, like, we still have John Connor. It's not like he got killed in the next movie right after he was just a cool badass in the previous movie, like Newt and Hicks in Alien 3, which will never be forgiven. Another thing I really wanted to talk about in this movie is the T-800 storyline, because I didn't like that storyline at all. I thought Arnold Schwarzenegger was really good in the movie. The T-800 is hilarious when he's saying stuff, but his whole thing where he's like selling drapes, I thought it was fine, but I just didn't buy the whole fact that he would actually settle down and start a family. I thought that was kind of dumb. I was like, I really don't think a Terminator would do that. Some of it was kind of laughable, and it was just that whole part where they find out that he's been living with his family in the middle of the woods in a cabin. Just brought the movie to a screeching halt. The entire middle of this movie just feels, the pacing just tanks. All because it's focusing on the T-800, who's named Carl in this movie. That is kind of stupid, and I don't really like it when they're named, but I'll say this. It's at least better than naming him Guardian or Pops, like Genesis did. So I can live with that. And, I mean, the T-800 is not really in it all that much. It's weird, though, that he was the one who killed John Connor, but yet he's just like, I feel really bad about it. I'm going to help you protect this young girl. I'm Arnold Schwarzenegger. That was kind of weird, too, where I was just like, he's just like, the moment it happened, I felt all the remorse in the world. If I could go back, I wouldn't do it. So, like, you get the sense that he feels regretful for his actions. And I love the scene where he's just like, Sarah Connor, she wants to kill him. I mean, if he killed my son, I'd try and do that too. So I like that dynamic. It's just the fact that he actually feels sad about doing it, and the fact that he settles down with a family, that I felt was a little too far-fetched. And I just thought it was kind of dumb. I was like, why is a Terminator got a family? Like, how does that make any sense? I don't think that makes any sense whatsoever. A small thing I want to talk about is that, from my understanding, and please feel free to roast me in the comment section if I totally get this wrong, but from what I understand, what this movie's telling me is that in the future, Skynet no longer exists. They've been reimagined as this new computer software, self-aware, robotic program called Legion, which is a dumb name, by the way. Like, how original. Like, at least Skynet sounds cool. Like, Legion is just like, with the Legion of Doom gonna pop up? Like, seriously. But, so I think they're, like, reimagined. My problem with that, too, is that, like, it's like, yeah, it's not Skynet, it's Legion. But it is Skynet. Like, when you think about it, when they explain what Legion is, it's like, well, that's exactly what Skynet was. But you're telling me that's not Skynet, or that's reimagined as Legion. So technically, even if it is reimagined, it's still not Skynet. But all the reasons Skynet became Skynet is the reasons Legion became Legion. So it's Skynet. That just, I felt like, just felt tacked on. You could have just said that they were Skynet. Like, why'd you have to change that Skynet was reimagined as some new, self-aware computer system? Because that was afraid of nuclear warfare, so they became self-aware and started doing nuclear attacks, and yes, Judgment Day happened. Judgment Day happens. We see the future in this movie. Obviously, Judgment Day happens, so, I mean, Legion has to be Skynet. So why even change it in the first place? That's what I didn't really get, because to me, Legion is still Skynet. It's the same thing. The same thing happens. It's the same world event that occurs, Judgment Day. The same reason Skynet goes online is the same reasons why Legion goes online. It didn't make sense to me that they tried to reimagine Skynet. I feel like it was because this Terminator movie feels like it is trying to appeal to a new audience, and I get that. You kind of have to do that. But I feel like they felt like it was too brainy for people to understand, so they're like, well, we have this computer program, we're just going to reimagine it as this computer program, but we're going to say it's but it's basically the same thing. We're just going to call it something different. And I didn't really like that. Again, feel free, if I totally got that wrong, feel free to mention it in the comments. Please correct me in a polite manner, or roast me, however you want to do it. That was just something, that was just like kind of a little thing I thought, but it was something I wanted to talk about because it just seemed pointless to me. I felt like Skynet should just be Skynet. Like, don't call it some other name. It's Skynet. Skynet went live. It's kind of like if you're reimagining Skynet, it's like we already did that in the previous movie because Genesis was the precursor to Skynet, but yet Genesis doesn't take place in the same timeline as Dark Fate. So technically Genesis is not Skynet, which kind of gets this whole timeline thing fucked up, honestly. Whenever you do time travel movies like this, the timeline's always going to be fucked up at the end. And I think that's kind of what this movie has going against it. Now that Rise of the Machines, Salvation, and Genesis take place in an alternate timeline, which I'm happy Genesis takes place in an alternate timeline. Like, that movie could just rot. I think they probably would have just been better off making a direct sequel to Rise of the Machines. I mean, that's kind of what Salvation was, or just a direct sequel to Salvation. I mean, I think that's kind of what we've been clamoring for, because Salvation was a little bit different. I mean, we already saw Judgment Day at the end of Rise of the Machines. We had heard so much about Judgment Day in Terminator and Terminator 2, and now we know Skynet's gone live. So I don't know. I mean, that's my whole rant with the whole Skynet Legion thing and how they're kind of the same and all of that, and I guess where I was going with that last point is that I just kind of felt like it was the same thing from the last movie, Genesis, where it felt like Genesis was the precursor to Skynet, but it was really the same thing. And in this one, Skynet is the precursor to Legion, but yet Legion is basically Skynet. I think that's kind of where I'm going with that. Those are really the three things I wanted to talk about with Terminator Dark Fate. So, I mean, that's really all I got for spoilers on Terminator Dark Fate. If you have seen the movie, I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to. Not as much as Terminator or Terminator 2, which I never expected it to reach the heights of those two. As long as it was at least better than Rise of the Machines and Genesis, I would have walked out satisfied, because I think Salvation is the better of those three. So I was like, even if it was worse than Salvation, I would have been okay, as long as it was better than Rise of the Machines and Genesis, which I thought it was. And I even thought it was better than Salvation. So if you guys have seen Terminator Dark Fate, drop me some feedback as to what you thought of the movie in the comment section below, and if I totally botched my explanation as to Skynet and Legion are the same thing, or if you totally think that that's completely wrong and it's something else, politely, in a polite manner, just feel free to correct me, or state your own opinion as to what you think it is. I'm really interested to see your theory on that, if Skynet and Legion are the same thing. So, thank you guys for watching. My name is Alex Madden. I'll see you at the movies somewhere.